All right, and we are live with the 23rd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter. I'm joined by my co-host Seth Law. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, at Seth Law on Twitter. And as always, you can follow us at Absolute AppSec on Twitter as well, or find us on iTunes or on the Google Play Store. So welcome once again.
Thanks to the efforts of Seth, we're on a few different platforms. So thank you, Seth, for that. We were out last week. It's the summer, so this is going to definitely happen where we take occasionally a week off. But we're back now. We're back for about 2 months straight, so it should be. Or I think we're skipping August 7th because it's Black Hat DEF CON. But beyond that, for a couple months, we're week by week. What did want to mention before we actually got into the podcast? We wanted to congratulate Neil and Justin. So Neil Matadal and Justin Collins from Brakeman Pro. They were acquired by Synopsys. Justin and Neil have both been on the podcast. By the way, I'm pretty sure I said Neil's last name wrong again, but my apologies. But yeah, congrats to you guys. Seth and I were like really super psyched to hear about that. So
yeah, it was good to hear. I mean, Synopsys is doing a lot of cool work around static analysis, so it makes a lot of sense, right, for them to pick up Brakeman and Brakeman Pro. It sounds like Justin's going to be joining their team full time, right, Ken?
Yeah, he already joined from what I understand. So as of
cool.
I think as of this week.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to talk to him again and see how that's going, where he's built a tool outside and it gets acquired. It should be an interesting story of an application security tool, right?
Yeah, I'll reach out to him again to reach out to both of them to see if they want to jump back on and talk about it. So this is going to be a bit confusing. Our guest tonight is Ken Toler. Ken, say hi.
Hey, everyone.
So we've got two Kens on the podcast tonight. Ken is, it's weird for me to say. It's always weird when you're saying, when you're talking about somebody else that has the same name, especially like Ken is not super common. So it's extra strange. But anyways, so Ken Toler, I've known Ken, we've known each other for about like 7 years now, I think. About 7 years.
Like that, yeah. Been quite a while.
Yeah, quite a while. I mean, we first met working together at Living Social. Since then, you've done a number of great things. You've really built up your career, and that's part of what we want to talk about tonight. But yeah, you've done quite a bit. You've bounced between AppSec, NetSec. I feel like you're a pretty well-rounded. And before doing security, you actually had the background of understanding IT and actually doing everything from like networking to help desk to whatever. So you did the full range of, I feel like you've done the full range of IT. So you've spoken at LastCon. I know you did a talk on Ruby meta programming flaws. That was an interesting one. So basically, we wanted to have Toler on to discuss his background, how he's now a head of security at OnDeck, and we wanted to have you on and talk about your journey and how you got started and what your day-to-day challenges are working at working to secure the company. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, man. I mean, for me, it was always just starting in IT, right? I think when I was in school, it was always the idea of where I wanted to go in terms of a career path, and IT was always there, always an interest to me. But I think a lot of it just came to figuring things out and breaking things and learning and constantly being striving for that. And that landed me through some sales and hardware and whatever. Eventually landed me at a help desk position in Living Social, where it was just kind of digging in to all the aspects of IT to really figure out what I wanted to do with my career overall. and that's where I met, I guess, a lot of the people that influenced my career, yourself included, R2 and Matt and all those guys there. But even then, I still didn't know really what direction I wanted to go. I think the transition from IT to security happened kind of naturally. You know, we were working through antivirus installs on endpoints, right? And then R2 was like, "Hey, you want to dig into some security stuff?" And it just kind of snowballed from there, digging into kind of all the things that were infosec and spending a lot of 12 to 16-hour days on and off the clock, just digging into trying to figure out what I wanted to do with that. um, I still kind of remember, that deer in headlights feeling of not knowing anything, and I think I still get that, and I've just learned that that's just kind of the norm in the industry, is to constantly be learning, constantly working towards that. Uh, and then after living social, it was just kind of, how can I land on my own 2 feet and kind of start a career myself? And I just went independent for a while, and did some training and worked for Citrix for a while, just kind of doing some security operations stuff and continuing to pick up and train and learn and read books. And then I think the most revealing thing for me was kind of making the transition over to application security. I remember a conversation with you, just sitting down and saying, "Hey, you want to do AppSec?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know anything about AppSec." You're like, "Don't worry, you'll learn. Read this book, Web Applications Handbook, and Hacker's Handbook, and you read it back to front." So, I mean, that's exactly what I did. I put that the notice that I gave for the previous job was like 4 weeks, just so that I would have enough time to get through the book and train and do all that, and followed that advice. Um, I did that for a while, got in the consulting game, and then moving to OnDeck out of that was just a kind of an opportunity to own an AppSec program. And then over time, that ownership of the AppSec program grew into ownership of additional programs and additional responsibilities, and that's kind of what landed me where I'm at today. And I oversee the security program, information security, application security, and technology risk.
So, what's it like making that shift from probably a more, I mean, running a program is running a program, but, for that all sounds like, to somebody who's listening, it might sound like, oh, that was a simple, I mean, that's a very condensed version of what happened. It took, like you had said, you did a lot of work, you did a lot of studying, you did a lot of you did consulting, you did a lot of stuff to get those experiences, to have that background, to do all the assessments, because we worked together at Invisium, and you did a couple years of just assessment after assessment. And guess what I'm saying is, you basically had this big chunk that was I would describe a very technical sort of chunk of your security career. And now you're doing more like program management, essentially. What's that feel like to do that shift? How's what's different? What are the pros? What are the cons? I am curious.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really tough to keep your technical head on straight. I mean, when you're doing assessments, assessment after assessment, I think it's really easy. And Chris mentioned this when he was on. It's easy to kind of take this really negative approach as to why aren't people doing this, and fixing these problems, and you kind of do this. You get used to doing these assessments in 2 to 3 week time spans where you generate a bunch of results, you deliver that to whoever stakeholders, and you expect these things to be resolved or worked on, and you just kind of set it and forget it. Being on the other side of that is really hard, and it's an interesting transition, because there are so many factors that go into why particular decisions are made, and it's shifting that focus of uh, you're shifting that focus a lot to try to understand the why behind everything that you're doing. And that there's so many factors that go into that. There's budgets, there's compliance, there's executive overhead, there's partnerships and regulations of your partners, to work through. And you start to shift mentality to how can I fix this in a way that solves all of these problems, and that is the most difficult hurdle to get over. Um, going from working on this very small part of a program to the entire program.
So being sort of in a strategic versus tactical mindset and essentially applying fixes that are as systemic as possible kind of sounds like what you're saying, and that address like if you can put in like I know I'm going to get whatever. I don't care what people think. Well, I'm just going to use this as an example. I'm not saying you should do this, but if you use like, for instance, a WAF, and then you've got a box check, and like, let's say it's a good WAF. So maybe some small smidgen of security added on, but maybe you've met like partner requirements, a compliance regulation. Again, probably a bad example, but it's the first one that popped in my head as like a box check kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that a lot of people think of checking the box, and it's like this. It's such a negative connotation with checking the box. I like to look at it as how can I check the box and make that work for me, and so sometimes that's going beyond like that line item and figuring out how we can use that to increase the security posture and basically sneaking other things in under the radar along with that. So if, for example, you have a key management compliance component that you need to meet, but you're not necessarily focused on that as an organization, you can use that compliance checkbox to drive that, and then use it to roll out something that maybe your other teams are trying to roll out, something that's innovative or sexy that people want to use. And that game is a lot of what I try to play these days, because
That's
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, right? I mean, it's almost like a skunkworks security program that you're running to really secure things,
Right.
using compliance as the as the stick. I learned that pretty early on in my like consulting career, like going to do architectural reviews and design reviews specifically, is that you go and talk to the developers, and you always pull that head developer aside and say, "Hey, what's the big problem here, and what do you need me to put in the report that you just don't have the ammo internally to do?" Right? Because if a consultant, for some reason, right, the organizations tend to value a consultant's opinion over their own, right, or over their own employees. So if it comes from a consultant that, hey, guess what, you need key management, they're going to look at that and say, all right, that gets put on the list in a higher priority than if someone internally comes and says, all right, we're going to put that into our backlog, right? And so, I mean, is that what you're saying? Is that's kind of how you're using compliance as you move forward?
Exactly. And you're playing the other side of that. It's if you go in with the mentality of I just have to check this box, you end up with a lot of tools and fixes that are all just exactly what we all hate, just these little patches of things that we may or may not need. And so if you take a step back and see like what's the spirit of this compliance check, or what's the motivation, and how can we drive that forward, you determine what checks that box overall. And that is like a lesson you have to learn to move the program forward, finding out what's important to the organization. If compliance is very, very important, especially in the finance industry, um, you're not going to be able to roll out something that doesn't meet that checkbox. So you might as well make it work for you.
Interesting. So, as head of security, would it normally head of security, like infrastructure, network, AppSec, sometimes physical falls under that as well, but a lot of times it consists of interacting with like IT, legal support, etc. So, I mean, that's the typical. I don't know if that's like what your role consists of, if those are the things you're responsible for securing. Does
You
that
know,
sound at all?
Yeah, no, I mean, my organization is technology, specifically technology risk, application security, and information security, incident response, things of that nature. Um, and some of the compliance components come into that, but we also, there's also financial compliance and other components that don't necessarily fall under security. And as far as the physical piece, we're more of consultants in that role. And I think that anytime you're looking at a program, you kind of have two or three ways you can come out of it. Either it's greenfield, new company, you come in and you can kind of build out what you want and make suggestions and see how people respond to you taking over these different areas of security, or you're inheriting a bunch of stuff and or kind of having to meet the requirements for a bunch of these different security disciplines. So for me, it's understanding what you can influence and what you can control from the top down. So for me, it's a very small it's a small subset of what we can control from the top down, and other components that we have to influence and develop relationships for. And I think that is a part of your strategy is aligning with these other departments to ensure that from your perspective you're controlling all aspects of security, but from the organizational hierarchy or how you look at it from it with that approach is you're influencing some parts of the business and you're controlling other parts.
Do you work? I'm just curious. Do you work on site or are you remote?
Both. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the day and what meetings are going on. Today, remote, t-shirts, all good.
So, I mean, I know we've talked about this in the past. I mean, and I know Evan Johnson has his opinions and everybody has the, would you say, I mean, I would imagine as like, the head of security, a lot of people you have to interact with is like, is it beneficial to be on site to foster those relationships?
Yeah, it depends. So all depends on the culture of the company, in my opinion. Some people respond really well to remote work, and if the culture of the company facilitates remote work, then then great, you can do it. But if you have anyone in leadership that doesn't respond well to remote interaction, and you want that person to be on your side, you're going to have to talk to them on their level. And it kind of goes to understanding why people make the decisions they do, and I think that's an aspect of gaining that ground and favor with folks that are going to be your allies and assets for any decision that's made from a security perspective. If you try to force your way into it, you're bound to fail somewhere. I'm not saying you'll fail every time, but there's going to be one person that's going to say, "No, like you have to come in," or whatever. And that's also how you choose where you're going to work and if it's the right place for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some value for sure for face to face. And also, like you said, it just depends on the. I mean, I guess the culture plays it definitely plays a factor, but I mean, some people are just naturally. I think all of us have known on this podcast, and probably those watching, people that don't come off super well in text, and there just are people like that, And
yeah, but you always fix that with a phone call. You're like, oh man, I sound like a real asshole right now.
Maybe I'll just call instead. Yeah.
Or maybe they sound like a real asshole. Whatever. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's up to you whether you want to make that statement to the other party, but
yeah.
I mean, video seems to take care of some of that, right? And audio definitely, right? Like making a phone call or making a personal connection. But I don't know. I think, especially as I'm trying to establish relationships, as an independent consultant with people, like I find that initial interaction, you've got to build some sort of relationship with them. That's a lot harder to do that online than it is in person, right? Once you've established it, it's very easy to go, 3 months or even longer, just having normal interactions online or over the phone. But until you have some sort of a relationship and some sort of a working relationship, it's very difficult to establish that without in-person contact. And I think that's where Evan gets off on his, kind of high horse with the whole startup mentality, right? I guess I shouldn't say high horse.
We love you, Evan.
Yeah. We totally love Evan, right? But I understand where he's coming from, right?
He's gonna break,
especially like, yeah, yeah. So yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of back channel stuff that goes on that you don't necessarily get if you're only chatting in Slack, right?
And that's the thing. If there's a big presence on site, So if you have a company that has a lot of people that come in on site, you're bound to miss some stuff that happens organically inside of the office environment. If most of the workforce is remote, then it's probably not as likely. But you have the same problem with satellite offices. You're just not going to get the same uh, information if you're not around the majority of the organization. So you have to make that effort. Whether that's if it's remote, then you're scheduling a lot of meetings. But if you make a couple visits on site, you can achieve a lot that way.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of one of my questions is how do you go about making sure that people give you the information that you need? Like we're rolling out some new feature or there's a new app coming online since we're AppSec, we'll say a new app coming online, but it could be like, hey, we're doing something that changes the way we check the box for SOC 2 or something like that. How do you get that relevant information? How do you foster that with the various teams you work with? I mean, obviously it is very much a thing where you rely on other people to kind of give you some of that information.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is all about finding people that see things or can like get on the same page with you and how you feel about approaching security in the organization. So for me, it's always having somebody in each location that is kind of my eyes and ears for a variety of things. There's somebody in, DevOps, somebody in IT, somebody in legal, someone in compliance, someone in internal risks. Find there's always you can whether it's cars or whatever it might be. Opening a communication channel that allows you to engage them frequently helps. And so that takes time to develop those relationships, but once you have them, those folks will come out to you and say, hey, we're sneaking this stuff through, or we're trying to get this this new feature out the door. Do you know about it? um, and then you have your more official channels like security gates or approvals or change management process, or whatever that kind of is your last line of defense against that kind of thing. um, for us, having a change management process is our exactly that, our last line of defense against it. So if something gets all the way there, it still needs security approval to be pushed to production. Um,
Oh, so like yeah, because that's one of the things that's always a concern, right? Is like new AWS environments get spun up that you don't know about, or like I said, a new app comes or new features, a new app comes online, and so a change. So just to going back to that, so there's a change management process for like new things coming online, or if something wants to be pushed into production, and it has to go through that. Basically everything has to go through that process. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, to get to that environment, yes, absolutely. And also, we have really good friends in DevOps that help us out with those 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 like ad hoc things that pop up here and there. So usually we have some contact in every department that is, we have some rapport with that allows us to handle some of that stuff. But when it goes into those sensitive environments, like there's a very specific process for that.
Do you incentivize? I mean, I've seen where people are incentivized to sort of, hey, I caught this, or I don't know if you incentivize people if they see something, they say something kind of deal, or if it's just sort of like that's the culture, like because I know that some companies are, I mean, very much, like everybody cares a lot. So if I mean, doesn't you don't need to be incentivized. Like if you see something, you're definitely going to say something to security and do
Yeah.
something.
We don't have a formal like incentive program, other than kind of like internal thanks. So, if folks do that, then we definitely recognize them, yeah, either in the internal intranet or go through that process. But it's interesting you should mention that. I think one of the contracts I was working on previously. I mean, I went through a huge effort to try to like gamify the whole bug hunting program, created badges, and like learned Photoshop, and went through this whole process of doing that, and it just didn't take off. So I think that also is a cultural thing. Like, do people respond to incentives or not? And do you have a budget to provide like the right incentive. Is it money or just reputation? So I think that more importantly is that relationship. It's for me, it's more valuable to have that one person that really cares about security and is going to come to me often than to try to incentivize multiple people. I think that raising that awareness is more powerful coming from a peer inside of the development organization or IT organization than it is coming from me or one of the security folks.
When you talk about informal communication, are you talking about like it could be just like a Slack message or email or something like that? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff we've tried out with like internal reputation and recognition where you get points and they and you can use those points and cash them in for gift cards and things like that. But it that it's super cultural. Like some teams are really about that, some teams just aren't. And it's like you get to the end, you have a certain amount of points to give, and people are just like, I'll give them to this guy, right? So it really depends on what team it is and how they respond to that type of culture. So uh, finding finding what that is a game in itself. And for me, rather than stand up that formal program, I think I've found more value in developing a few really strong relationships with folks that are really interested in security. And maybe in a few months or down the road in a year they'll be on the security team. That's kind of how I look at it.
how do you like, because we always use the term like security champion or something along those lines, which I think is maybe what you're talking about. And how do you identify those people? I've been asked that before, and I'm like, I don't know. Here was my answer. They usually come out of the woodwork themselves because they're like, "Hey, did you know about this?" or have questions that are security related because they're just more interested and more curious. Like really people that are super curious about like, "Hey, is that okay?" Those are the people that I usually, but I don't know how to like how to go out and seek those people. That's a tougher question. I'm not sure if you figured out the answer to that.
I mean, it's talk to every developer, right? It's like you have to.
Great! You're telling all these like introverts that they need to go out and talk to all these people. That's what you're saying. No.
I mean, that's exactly it. Like you have to find some way to communicate with those folks to find out if that's the case. Like sometimes, yeah,
Come on, get pull requests, right? It's all through get pull requests.
Is there a shell script you can run?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could. It's it just integrates with Slack and mass spams and but yeah, I mean, it's talking to everybody that may respond that way. And then you're right. After that, after you've talked to them, whether it's submitting a secure, if you've submitted a vuln and someone responds to why is this important, and you answer it, and that engages in a conversation, you've identified like a potential security champion, right? But if you uh if you're like looking for like do they have a certain mark on them to like identify them as a security champion, you're gonna have to work to find out who's interested in that or not, because some folks are naturally interested in security and you'll find them out really early, and some folks just don't know that they're interested in security until you've like shown them that for like the first time they've seen XSS, and that still happens. People that have just out of school and like never seen SQL injection or XSS, we take that stuff for granted. um, yeah, I mean, you can. That's an easy way to do it, and then they become that person that's like constantly trying to find that stuff or coming to you when that happens, and it just they come out of the woodwork. I agree with you 100%.
I do remember at Living Social, when Stripe ran Stripe had a security centric, because they had CTFs, like I think a couple CTFs, and they weren't all security centric, but there was one that was one that was AppSec specific, is what I'm trying to say. And by running that CTF, there were like, I remember seeing devs writing about them doing that. Like we didn't put that out. It was just online. And I remember devs being like, saying, "Hey, this is interesting. I'm doing this." And then we put it out.
Yeah.
We're like, "Yeah, please tack on." And then from that, we found like definitely several, security champions, we'll say, who were just like, who defeated the challenges and were like now kind of, I guess, inspired. but yeah, I mean, beyond that, I hadn't seen any other technique used other than, like you said, kind of just they come out of the woodwork, or you go try and talk to more people, and maybe you find them. I guess it's
I mean,
You always.
another. Sorry, go ahead, Seth.
Oh no, I was going to say you always have that one group that it's very difficult to find someone on, right? That no one seems to be interested. But that seems to be pretty rare, at least in my experience. Is most of the time there's at least one guy on the team that has some inclination and wants to know more or wants to learn more, whether it's the guy directly out of school or something, or somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, there's another good thing. I mean, one of the ways to approach it too is just training. I mean, and training not just for AppSec. So trying to gauge interest. We've done things with the Rubber Ducky, and we invite the whole org, right? And I think the most interesting one was um, when I went to DerbyCon, I got in contact with the tool guys for all the lockpicking stuff. I was like, I need like 40 locks and stuff, and I don't want to pay shipping. Can I just buy these things off you? We bought like a bunch of lockpick sets and a bunch of locks, and it did an internal training on lockpicking and invited sales and support and development and all that. And that identified some security champions outside the tech org, and just in sales. Um, and that's super interesting too, because then they kind of come to you about physical security stuff, because that spawns a conversation about tailgating and whatever. So those trainings don't have to be like just like these in-depth, really technical things about um, whatever new vulnerability is plaguing the industry right now, but it can be something really general that goes to the masses, that kind of identifies folks in other places, and then after that they'll come to you.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, because we usually focus on the dev side of things, just because obviously absolute AppSec, right? But like the sales org is arguably, or the sales piece of the org, that's arguably one of the like most at risk groups, for like going on Wi-Fi that's not secure in like their hotel or a coffee shop, getting their laptop stolen because they're traveling a lot, right? So they're using they're in a lot of public places. They're using the internet in those public places. They may not be as technically savvy, as say an engineer. I mean, most likely they're not as technically savvy as an engineer. Yeah, pretty at risk group. So that's interesting to hear that's got to be that makes sense. That's a bit of a concern for overarching, in your position for like all of security.
Yeah, I mean, if you anywhere you can find somebody is going to be helpful, because some of that stuff comes from the most unlikely source. If you can get folks that interact with customers on the website all the time, and that's for us, that's in sales and support. That's really valuable. Somebody that has eyes on that stuff all the time and notices something, or notices like a potential fraud case or something along those lines, is also valuable for the application security team. So it's not limiting, the communication there to just IT and developers and going from from back to front. Sometimes it's helpful to have those assets elsewhere.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of a I don't know how much of a selling point security is in most orgs, let alone I have no clue on yours. But I always wonder if maybe sales understands security better, if it maybe helps them actually sell, especially if what I mean is if it's a like a SaaS product, or obviously something that's a
I mean, we always see that in marketing, right? They always talk about their military grade encryption.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the but in general, like what Ken's doing on his team there sounds like it could lead to even more discussions around that when they start talking to customers and others. Is the fact that hey, they recognize that security is an issue and that the company is doing something about it, right? I think that's not necessarily the primary focus of what he's trying to, of trying to build those security champions, but that could be an unintended side effect or an unintended consequence.
Yeah, could be. I mean,
I don't know. You'd think that it would be helpful from a sales perspective to understand what your company is doing about security, so you can talk intelligibly to it. I mean, how many conferences do we go to where you go talk to a sales guy and they just refer you to the technical people as soon as you get into anything that's even like remotely to do with compliance or anything else?
Yeah, I'd be blown away if a salesperson was like, "Oh, no. Yeah, like here's exactly what we do, and here's what our program looks like internally, and here are the reasons why it's secure." And yeah, that would be super interesting. I mean, I would be super impressed for sure.
I mean, if I'm able to get enough knowledge transferred to a salesperson that they can speak to that level, then that's I consider that a great success. I don't I just think it's helpful to get that information out to anybody that'll listen, and then gather the information the other way. Also important to understand how sales does their job, and why they find security controls or whatever cumbersome, and working to rectify the functional problems as well. Those are all like brand new challenges to from like on the program level. Is just like you implement all these security tools, and you kind of you take it for granted sometimes that, I understand why this is slow, I understand why this is affects my performance or whatever. And it, if you don't engage in that conversation, you just get like the worst reputation, and then it becomes almost impossible to push anything else. So those trainings and knowledge transfers really help with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Reputation building is super important.
Yeah, it takes one really bad experience with a security control or tool to just like destroy that. So it's as frequent and often, as much as you can speak to folks outside your department.
Well, yeah, and people will just go around it. That's what they do. Like this is getting in the way of me getting something done, so I'm just going to go around it. So
right. And
yeah, I mean, and to your point, Ken, I mean, the one time that you mess up and that you don't do that, right, that lives on forever in those guys, or in that team's head. Right? And, 2 years down the road, you think you've repaired that relationship, and it pops up yet again that one time that they weren't able to push out a critical patch because the firewall prevented them, or their SSH key or whatever. Like, it's an issue that you constantly have to fight, so they understand and they don't blame security, right? I mean, one of the companies that I worked at they were always focused on security being a change agent and being like a help agent to the developers and the DevOps teams, rather than the agent of no, right? We're not the gatekeeper, and we don't want to be the gatekeeper. If we say no, it's because compliance is telling us to say no, or it's because management is telling us that this is what we're supposed to adhere to. And shifting that blame a little bit certainly helps, but the second that stink gets on the security team, it's not going to come off.
Right. And then the other thing is you're destroying the relationship with those other teams who you also have to work with. So it's like if you shirk everything over to a compliance team or a compliance task, or because, oh, we just have to do it because of this or that. Now when you go to them to like try to push your own agenda or initiatives, it's like absolutely not, man. I mean, you pushed everything on us. So
you threw us under the bus.
Yeah. And so it's really easy to fall in that trap of like, oh, this is just because of compliance, which is why, it goes back to what I was saying before is, make that work for you. If it's because of compliance, like why? Fight it. If you can't fight it, then everyone has to be on the same page and like kind of moving forward in the right direction. So that has to be explained to everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot that people...
yeah.
So no, I was going to say there's a lot of, for those who've never dealt with compliance, there's actually a lot of like in a compliance, it's not black and white. Like if you get a big spreadsheet of compliance requirements, you can certainly be like, yeah, we've got this covered by X, Y, and Z. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. It doesn't mean that, like you can offload responsibility. Like if you're using AWS, you can offload responsibility to certain things to AWS because it's a shared security model. You can, like, let's say they're like, well, you've got a requirement to do scanning. Well, like you can, and I think we've talked about this on one of the episodes before, you can certainly just plug in like something like if it's a Rails op brakeman, if you want to do something that like even just audits libraries in one of your apps and put that in the pipeline, that's technically a scan. So there's a lot of like gray area where you can get around. So it's up to you. It's like, I guess what I'm saying is when I hear you say, Ken, like it's a compliance requirement. It's like, or that you're trying to meet both the goal of a requirement, but also do it intelligently and in a way that actually impacts security. I totally get that, because it's such an abstract thing. It's not always just like, do you have this? Okay, cool, rubber stamped, like box checked. Sometimes it's a little like gray area.
Yeah, and the industry is kind of like caters to this, like not understanding how these things work. I can't tell you how many times we've gone into like an initial conversation with a vendor, and we're like, what are compliance requirements have you met? And they're like, oh yeah, we're SOC 2 type whatever, we've got all SOCs, PCI. We're like, all right, can you send us the evidence of that? And it's just like all of AWS's stuff. Like that's not how it works, But there's just this misconception of how compliance works, especially on on the like lower end of um, vendors or folks that are starting up or people that are in startups. They use this and it works with some folks. And for us, it's like we take to heart like what that shared responsibility means, and really try to like make sure that our entire organization understands where that comes from. So we're not just kind of doing we're bank level secure.
Yeah. At rest, we've got like our S3 buckets have the files encrypted at rest, and our DBs are encrypted at rest, but they use a default fucking password, and they're open out on the internet, but they're using encryption at rest. So something.
Yeah, exactly. And you can take the approach of talking around a lot of stuff that that involves compliance, or you can kind of stick to your guns and try to use that to your benefit, which is what I keep coming back to.
Yeah. Well, and I think a part of that is a lot of people don't understand. I mean, if you've never been through like a SOC 2 audit, or you've never been through a PCI audit, right? Like it's very easy for an organization to take that auditor when they come in and turn their head, right? Just be like, hey, this is what we have. This is what we're going to have you focus on. So instead of these problems that we have over here that we know we have, we're going to focus you on the stuff that we've done right. And I mean, every one of these breaches that comes out, I'll bet you that those organizations are SOC 2 compliant, that they are PCI compliant. I mean, we know that they are, right? Whether that's, the Target breach from years ago or any of those, they've all passed PCI compliance. And, like even then compliance is the absolute minimum, right? We always say compliance does not equal security. Just because someone says that they use username and passwords and 2FA authentication, that doesn't mean that they use it all across the board with every single technology that they have. It means that they may use it for one portion or one application, and then everything else is, shared passwords. So,
right. So, I mean, that's why whatever your strategy is, or whatever, organization you belong to, is just making sure that your personal ethics and ideals align with that business. And I think that that's like the number one, I guess, component that you kind of need to consider if you're going to be managing a program, because if that doesn't match, then you're going to be fighting a really, really hard battle.
Yeah. So, I mean, along those lines, what do you kind of see as your biggest challenge in, managing a program versus, managing like a technical, assessment, or, being a technician or an engineer?
Yeah. I mean, I think it all comes back to kind of evangelizing security in the organization. I think that I'm really lucky that folks are open to kind of hearing what I have to say. But I kind of use the analogy that, especially with development teams, that, if all I did every day was Ruby, it'd be really hard to explain that to an auto mechanic. Like I have to work on my own car first. And it's like, I think that is the challenge, is taking the time to understand what other people are going through and how it affects their day to day. Whereas in a technical assessment, I just have to worry about kind of how it affects the application or the architecture or whatever it might be. And then the results are very limited to kind of what the end result effect is. Even if I follow that all the way through the application constellation, it's still like where's the input, where's the output, and how does it affect this, like really, like what's my scope and how does it affect what's in that scope. With the organizational piece, even those application vulnerabilities, it's like, how does that affect the organization? And that's a really big scope.
Interesting. So it's not So are you saying that if like you get a report and it's like, hey, you got 4 highs and 3 mediums and a couple lows, like maybe some of that doesn't matter as much as like the person doing the assessment placed the emphasis on? Is that what you're saying? That doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much exactly what I'm saying. But yeah, like if somebody comes in and they're like, "This is a critical vulnerability. Your whole organization is going to get pwned because of this." It's like, where does that application exist? Who does it affect? Who uses it? What other applications have critical vulnerabilities, and how many resources do we have to throw at it? And then what's our budget? You know, um, and how many people do we have? If you have one security engineer, it's going to be really hard to solve, all those criticals. So of the criticals, what is the most critical? And then everything's on fire. So it's managing that risk, and understanding why that risk is managed in an organization is really important, because it's not possible to do it all unless you have an unlimited budget and unlimited people. And security is expensive, man. So we either take less money and just pro bono, or we kind of hit the ground running and do what we can and automate what we can and build tools and work with what we have, um, and approach risk intelligently. And I think that at some point that diverges into compliance, and it's like you walk a really fine line of what is important in your organization and what's important to you, and that is like it's a slippery slope, but it's a challenge, and it's a lot of fun to kind of approach that with a risk mindset, knowing what it takes to kind of get through the assessment and get through the technical side of it.
So like, let's say somebody aspires to be, to basically run a security program. What should they sort of, what would help them get to that point? Like what milestones along their path to running a security program would you recommend? Things that would have made maybe it, I don't know if there's anything that would have made your job easier if you had done, or if things that you did that worked out for you, just because we do try to foster people to watch this podcast who don't necessarily have the experience, the background or experience, and it would be helpful, I think, to those folks to know that kind of information.
Sure. I mean, I think it's stepping outside your comfort zone of the technical aspect of things, and opening up to things that we don't talk about, like management and project management, and reading, and just trying to dive into understanding the human aspect of the rest of the organization. Because if you're managing a program, in order to do it successfully, I truly believe that you have to have on some level an understanding of the people that you're working with, and if you approach it with only the technical mindset, or only kind of where you're coming from, and then it's going to be very, very difficult to convince them of your point of view without having some point of reference to work with them on. The other thing is, going to conferences outside of security. We kind of joke about like which security conferences are more technical than others, and attending those. But the AWS conference is like super interesting to go to. If you can find like any management conferences, or working with some of that, even if it's not your cup of tea, just to kind of even if you come out of it going, that is ridiculous, I don't understand why anybody does that, at least you have an understanding of why people approach it that way, or how they're going to think. So that way, if somebody comes to you, and you're working with a project manager that's like Six Sigma or something, you can kind of understand what their flow is going to be, or how they're going to operate through managing a project that you're involved with. And that's super helpful because you can speak on their terms. It's like, you wouldn't approach designing secure SDLC for Agile without understanding what Agile is.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for sure. Sorry, Seth.
Sorry.
Okay. No, I wasn't sure if you had
I
something.
jumped off for a second. No, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, no. Okay. So along those lines of, of kind of, getting exposed to things outside of security and knowing kind of like the breadth and depth of whatever technology is going to be used, getting to meet developers, getting to see what sort of the culture looks like, how it's shaping out. Along those lines, there's other things that I know you wanted to, that you've dealt with, and you kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, which are like, okay, you're going to do your first talk, you're going to do your first blog. You need to meet some people and network. Like, can you kind of, elaborate on, what it's like to do your first talk, tips for that, things like that?
Yeah, first talks. I was really lucky for first talks because I had a lot of people around me that were doing talks. So doing it with somebody, it takes off a lot of pressure. And I remember I was doing one talk, and I think it was when we were doing the metaprogramming talk, and it was just like, I went in there thinking that, okay, I don't really have to do a lot of work here, but then the other person got really busy, and I was like, okay, now I have to do a bunch of this stuff, and it just kind of forces you to do it. And then that person also kind of pushes you along and is there for your support, like when you have that lull in conversation, or you just have, that complete stage fright of like, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing. Um, but just putting it together. The other thing is, don't think that like any topic is too like rudimentary to work on. The blogs, the a series of blogs for Burp, I think I put together a while back, was like, it's you could definitely go on Burp's website and or like just go on YouTube and find some intro videos, but there's something about just putting that out there. If somebody reads it, great. If not, then you have like a reference for yourself. And I know that we've brought that up or that you guys have brought that up on the podcast before, is like, just get it out into the wild. And if it's standing up, I don't know, and a mail server, or that going through a CTF guide by yourself and just posting YouTube about it, those are valuable because you may say it in a way that makes more sense to someone than that original content. And maybe you're more entertaining, maybe you're less entertaining, but you've done it, and that gets it gets the wets the palate a little bit and gets your feet wet.
Yeah, and it's actually funny you mentioned that about the blogs. Like the funny thing, so obviously, I ran engineering at one point, and so I had access to all the stats on blog stuff, and for a security company. And what I always found to be interesting is that there was no way to predict what was going to be interesting, what people were going to want to read. I didn't feel like there was any. I mean. Along with what you're saying, yeah, Burp stuff is usually pretty popular because it's super practical, and obviously anything that's widely used and practical is and easy to consume, because like you said, you can definitely compile information from various sources yourself. Sometimes it's nice to have somebody else's kind of like condensed version, like the cliff notes on it, and also a good reference, as you said, to go back. But in terms of like what exactly is, it's like rolling the dice, honestly. Sometimes like the most random shit that I would not have thought was going to be popular blew up. And then other stuff that's deeply technical and, maybe even a lengthy post, crickets. It's just so hard to predict.
I mean, it's just like, it can be, that's why, I think it can be anything. You can, whatever tutorial you've gone through, just write a blog about it, and see if and use that as your own reference, because somebody will read that, and that's all you really need. Like with the Burp stuff, it was just like, I think it was just like how to like set scope in Burp. Was it basically like the essentials of that? But that got so many hits, and it's I'm like, but this is a document like available online. But for whatever reason, that was a popular one.
Yeah. Again, it's hard to predict, but that's why, hell, Seth and I doing this podcast is pretty much like, it's not, we just enjoy doing it. It's not because like, we're hoping to get a bunch of views and make money off of it. We're just, it's going to be a small viewer base, I'm sure, forever. And that's fine. Like, we just do it for fun. And I think there's some value to just doing stuff that's just fun anyways, even if it's not like, even if it's not like it's gonna, help your career or whatever, like there is always value in doing something that's just you're passionate about it, you enjoy it.
Yeah, if you find it cool, someone else is gonna like feel the same way about it.
It might be one other
Yeah.
person, but yeah, somebody.
Someone else is on the same boat, and they're like, "I wish that there was a guide, or I wish that there was a post about this." It doesn't have to be like this new tool that you've created, and all these great things, and that's all awesome and fun. But sometimes it's like too technical for some folks, and they just want some content. And if that's what you need to just get started because you're confident about it, then that's where you start.
Yeah, and like I can honestly say we've met through this podcast, Seth, like a few people now that are like more than a few people that we didn't have any connection to before. We didn't know. Like now we know some people that we didn't have. We've got additional conversations and additional just people that we can connect with doing AppSec, which is like just because we decided to, hey, flip on some cameras, turn on YouTube Live, and start doing a podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to actually see how it happens and how those networks grow, right? I mean, you think about like Stack Overflow, right? And how many of those questions are redundant? It's the same error message and 50 people have had it, and yet you still have to dig through 20 of them to figure out your specific situation. And that's exactly what I think you're trying to say, Ken, is just because you've approached it in one way, it's going to speak to someone in that same way, whereas there may be 99 people that have a similar problem or maybe aren't as interested in it. Or you may hit on a specific way that you talk about it that's very generic and very helpful for other people. So it's helpful for you, it's helpful for them.
I think a really good example of those is like all of the DigitalOcean tutorials for like simple stuff like standing up elk or standing up a mail server. Those like the articles for that have been written to death, and but they kind of take the approach of like, we know it's been written to death, but we're going to do it better. And so there's some little odds and ends in there that make that process a lot easier for that kind of stuff. And the same approach can be taken with AppSec. I mean, what is missing out of the tutorial that you went? Like, what was that hurdle that you were like, man, that was weird. I had to do this other step to get to this point. That is, then your article is just that much better.
Writing fucking burp extensions was that for me. Seriously. Like I still have videos on YouTube that I made because like that was the thing is like there was the online documentation, but all right, that was hard to figure out. So like I think when you take something like that and you make it user friendly and you make it easy for someone to pick up, like it's that's super beneficial.
Even if the article is just like, hey, follow all of this, but here are all the things you need to do as well. I mean, that would be just as helpful if you're not a verbose person.
So beyond like doing blogging, doing speaking, going to conferences that are outside of security, are there any other kind of like prerequisites that you should and milestones you should hit along your way that you can think of to say running a security program for someone who's kind of new to all this?
I think if you have the opportunity to run a small team, that's super helpful too, because it's really just the scope just gets a little bit bigger each time. I think that a really good opportunity that I had early on in consulting was kind of just like Seth, you were mentioning some of this as well, being able to run teams that you're not like necessarily invested in. Like you kind of have a lot of say in what secure, like where security goes when you're a consultant, and you have the opportunity to do the technical side and the management side all at one time as a consultant. So if you treat that as kind of a an intro to managing a team to see if you like it, like that's a really good opportunity. If it's a gig where folks are trying to ramp up a better secure SDLC, or if you have the opportunity to do training for a group or something like that, those are really good opportunities to kind of touch on some of the responsibilities you'll face running any program, whether that's security or application security specifically or information security specifically.
Awesome. Well, I know we're hitting about an hour here. So Is there anything that you wanted to, we always ask folks that join, hey, is there anything that you're going to release soon? Is there any speaking or anywhere you're speaking, any conferences you're going to be attending, anywhere people can interact with you? Just anything that you have coming up that you want to talk about?
Most of my projects right now are internal, but I'm hoping to get some stuff out on AWS, so keep an eye out for that. You can follow me or interact with me on Twitter at Rolotnik, and inside of the Absolute AppSec chat. I'm usually there during the session, so definitely like the troll there.
We didn't notice that at all. No.
No, I mean, it's you usually have actually good questions in there too, so that's helpful. So yeah, he's so it's RELOTNEK. That's how you spell that for his Twitter. I should just put it on here. I'll just put it on the video. Cool.
Flash up there.
What'd you say?
I said it's gonna flash up there like a banner.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. What kind of podcast do you think this is? Right, our post processing is very highly technical. There you go.
Yeah, we're not exactly. We're not exactly highly invested in the editing part of any of this. So, but Seth, anything I know we had a bunch of news that we're not gonna get to tonight. But was there anything that you wanted to mention? You know what? Actually, there's some before you say anything. There's something I wanted to mention was that everybody knows we're doing everybody that's watching this podcast routinely and has seen the last few episodes knows that we're doing training at AppSec USA on how to perform effective and efficient code reviews. But we OWASP Melbourne, Australia reached out to us. They asked us to go to Melbourne in October, the week after AppSec USA. So we will be at AppSec Day in Melbourne, Australia, doing training, possibly speaking, some fun stuff. So did want to mention that, we'll be out there in October, late October. So I think like October 19th, maybe 20th, something like that.
Yep.
Anything else, Seth?
No, I don't necessarily think so. Right. I think outside of we are going, or I will be at DEF CON during like Vegas time period. If people are around, hit me up. Would love to see people. Outside of that, really AppSec USA and then AppSec Days in Australia are the two big ones. There may be Cactus Con and some others thrown in there.
Fingers crossed on Cactus Con.
There you go. Yeah. But I mean, realistically, reach out, let us know. I mean, we can do an on-site podcast or something like that if somebody's interested or just wants to go, catch a drink and talk AppSec or security in general. We'd be happy to do that.
Awesome. I did want to shout out to Kevin Cody. I did after our whole JWT.
Sweet.
I bought the shirt. So
Now it just said, "I want you."
Yeah, that's true.
It was weird. Yeah, it's weird. No, it's Randall. I don't know how to say his last name. Randall Diggs from Okta, who did the YJWT's suck at session tokens. For those who don't know, that's where the shirt "I want you to stop using JWTs" comes from. But anyways, just want to throw that out there for Kevin Cody.
Yeah, cool. Well, Ken, thanks for coming on. Right. And hopefully we'll have you back on sometime, and you can continue the story. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
All right. Well, we appreciate it. Thanks everyone who watched. We'll be back next Tuesday with Jason White. Jason White will be joining us next week. I look forward to that. And at Misfire on Twitter. Cool. Well, thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon. Bye.